The moment of thanks. The evening was calm, yet the hall was filled with people who carried restless hearts. Leaders, innovators, and thinkers from every corner of the world had gathered. They were not just there for a conference. They were there to listen to stories that touched lives, stories that went beyond numbers and technology. Everyone expected a polished speech, but few expected the deep emotion that was about to unfold. The audience leaned forward, not knowing that this night would hold a moment they would never forget. Sundar Pichai walked slowly to the stage. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. People had seen him before in interviews, at product launches, at global events. But this moment was different. There was no new gadget to show, no corporate announcement. Instead, Sundar paused, looking across the sea of faces, and then he spoke words that immediately pulled everyone in. "Tonight," he said softly, "I do not want to talk about technology. I want to talk about kindness. I want to talk about the woman who taught me what true strength is. My mother, Lakhmi Pichai." The room grew silent. You could hear nothing but the quiet breath of anticipation. From the very beginning, Sundar did not hide his emotions. He spoke of his childhood, of a modest home in Chennai, where every coin mattered and every choice carried weight. There were no luxuries. Life was simple, but it was not easy. Sundar described how his mother never complained. She carried her struggles quietly, giving her children courage instead of fear. She would often say, "Kindness is never wasted, even when the world does not notice it." These words stayed with him, and now he was ready to share them with the world. The audience listened as if they were children again, leaning in to hear a bedtime story filled with warmth and pain. Sundar paused, and then he surprised everyone. He turned to the front row, where Satya and Della was sitting. The two men had often been compared, rivals in business, leaders of giant companies. But in this moment, Sundar's voice carried only gratitude. "Satya," he said gently, "I thank you tonight. You honored my mother's kindness when few even knew her name. You showed respect that went beyond roles, beyond companies, beyond competition. You reminded me that humanity comes first, always." Satya looked back at him, his eyes reflecting humility. The audience whispered in surprise. This was not rivalry. This was something higher. This was respect crossing all lines. The story grew deeper. Sundar recalled a moment when his mother had once been overlooked by people who thought wealth and power defined worth. He remembered her standing quietly with dignity, never raising her voice, never fighting back. "It hurt me," Sundar admitted, "but she told me that kindness is stronger than anger. She said kindness may not win the moment, but it wins the heart." And one day, it was Satya who proved her words right. He honored her in a way that the world could see. Sundar's voice trembled, and for a moment the silence in the hall was so heavy it felt like time had stopped. The audience could feel the weight of those words. People expected leaders to talk about strategies, markets, or success. But here was Sundar, showing his heart, showing his roots. People saw not the CEO of a tech empire, but a son remembering his mother's sacrifice. They saw two men who could have been rivals, choosing instead to respect and uplift. The unexpected twist was not in the world of technology, but in the world of human connection. It was not a product launch. It was a lesson that every person, no matter their background, could carry with them. The hall erupted in applause, but it was not loud applause. It was soft, heavy with emotion, like people clapping with tears in their eyes. Some nodded quietly. Some closed their eyes, remembering their own mothers, their own moments of kindness that shaped them. Sundar stood there, not smiling in pride, but standing with humility, as if he himself was just a messenger for his mother's spirit. And Satya, sitting silently, lowered his head, acknowledging the depth of what had been said. The first part of the story ended not with a conclusion, but with a question that stayed in the hearts of everyone present. What does it mean to truly honor kindness? The audience wanted more. They wanted to know what happened next, how this bond of respect grew, and how Lakhmi Pichai's simple words would travel far beyond one family and into the hearts of millions. The weight of memories. The applause from Sundar's words slowly faded, yet the silence that followed was even more powerful. People leaned back in their seats, but their hearts leaned forward. Everyone wanted to know more, not about technology, not about numbers, but about the quiet strength that lived behind those stories. Sundar took a deep breath, as if reaching deep into his past to bring forward memories that were hidden but never forgotten. His eyes softened, and he began again. "When I was a boy," he said, "I often wondered why my mother never asked for anything for herself. She would work long hours, she would give her time, her energy, her smile to others, and yet she never demanded anything in return. I remember once asking her, 'Don't you feel tired? Don't you feel unappreciated?' She looked at me and said, 'Sundar, kindness is not an exchange, it is a seed. You may not see it grow right away, but one day it will bloom where you least expect it.'" The hall grew quiet again. Those words were simple, yet they carried weight. Sundar's voice trembled as he shared them. He looked at the audience, but his mind was far away, back in the narrow streets of his childhood home, where his mother's sacrifices built the foundation of his future. He then told a story that caught everyone off guard. He recalled a day when his family faced a moment of great hardship. Bills were piling up, and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Sundar, still young, felt the crushing weight of fear. But his mother, with calm strength, cooked food and quietly shared it with a neighbor who had nothing to eat that night. Sundar remembered feeling confused. "We had so little," he said, "yet she gave it away. I asked her why. She said, 'Because our struggle does not erase their struggle. If I can make someone smile today, it means I am still rich in kindness.'" The audience shifted in their seats. Some wiped their eyes. The story was no longer about one family. It was about every mother who had sacrificed silently, every person who had given when they had little. It was about the invisible strength that holds families together, the strength that is rarely celebrated. Sundar then looked again towards Satya and Nadella, and this time he shared a moment that revealed the hidden bond between them. He explained how, years later, when his mother's story was almost forgotten by the world, Satya chose to honor her in front of leaders and students. "Satya," Sundar said, "when you spoke of my mother's kindness, you gave her the respect she never asked for but always deserved. You reminded the world that greatness is not measured in titles, but in the humility of the people who shape us." Satya nodded quietly, and the audience saw something rare. Two leaders, often placed in competition, showing only respect for each other's humanity. It was not a business story. It was a human story. It was a reminder that even in the highest places of power, what people remember most are not victories in markets, but moments of kindness and respect. The suspense in the hall grew stronger. People were not only listening, they were waiting. They wanted to hear how this respect between Sundar and Satya unfolded further. They wanted to know what twists and turns came next in this journey of humility, resilience, and kindness. Sundar ended his part with words that felt like a soft question to every listener. What do we choose to honor in this life? The power we gain, or the kindness we receive? The hall was filled with silence once again. But it was not an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with reflection. Each person knew the story was not finished. Something deeper was still waiting to be told, something that would reveal why this moment between Sundar and Satya carried so much meaning. Respect beyond rivalry. The night moved on, but the weight of Sundar's words still rested on the hearts of the people in the hall. No one expected such depth. No one expected such emotion. They had come for a gathering of leaders, but what they received was a reminder of life itself. Sundar stood there, his voice steady but filled with warmth, and the story opened another chapter. Many people think leadership is about winning, he said softly. They believe it is about being the strongest, the smartest, or the most powerful. But my mother told me something different. She said, "True leadership is not about standing above others. It is about lifting others, even when you are tired yourself." I never fully understood her words until life tested me. Until I saw how respect can grow even between rivals. He turned once more to Satya Nadella, and the hall grew still again. People were curious. Some even leaned forward, eager to know what came next. Sundar continued. "There was a time," he said, "when the world compared us endlessly. Google versus Microsoft, Sundar versus Satya. Headlines wanted competition. They wanted rivalry. But Satya showed me something else. When he learned about my mother's story, he did not see it as weakness. He did not see it as something to be ignored. Instead, he gave it value. He spoke about her strength in a way that honored not only her, but every parent who silently sacrifices for their children. In that moment, he reminded me that respect is stronger than rivalry." The audience murmured quietly. They were witnessing something rare. Two leaders of great power were showing vulnerability, humility, and gratitude. It was not the kind of story people expected at such an event, but it was the kind of story that stayed in memory far longer than any announcement could. Sundar then told a small but powerful memory. He recalled the day when he had first met Satya at a private gathering. Everyone expected formal handshakes and polite exchanges. But Satya had asked him about his mother. Sundar was surprised at first, but he realized that Satya's question came from genuine respect, not from courtesy. "That day," Sundar said, "I understood something important. Respect is not shown in public speeches alone. It is shown in private words, in the way one human sees another human." A pause filled the hall again. The silence was no longer awkward, it was almost sacred. The listeners were not just hearing a story, they were experiencing it with their own emotions. Some remembered their own mothers, some remembered mentors or friends who had quietly given them strength when the world did not notice. And then Sundar shared a twist that no one expected. He spoke of a letter that Satya had once written, not to him, but to his mother. In that letter, Satya thanked her for raising a son who carried kindness into his leadership. The hall gasped quietly. It was such a simple gesture, yet so rare in a world where leaders often competed fiercely for recognition. "My mother kept that letter," Sundar said, his voice breaking slightly. "She told me that day, 'You see, Sundar, kindness never dies. It returns, sometimes from places you never imagined.'" The hall erupted into quiet applause again. People clapped not out of habit, but out of genuine respect. They were moved, not just by the story, but by the idea that humility and kindness can live even at the highest levels of power. As Sundar stepped back for a moment, the audience felt something powerful. This was no longer just a speech. It was a journey. And deep inside, everyone knew that this story was still unfolding. What had started as a memory of one mother was now growing into a lesson for the entire world. And the question lingered once again. What happens when kindness becomes the bridge between rivals? The unseen bond, the night grew heavier, but no one moved from their seats. The hall was no longer a place of speeches. It had become a place of reflection. Sundar's words had peeled away the layers of power and pride, leaving only raw humanity. The audience wanted to hear more, to know how far this story of kindness and respect would travel. Sundar, standing tall yet humble, continued with quiet strength. "My mother always told me," he said, "that the true measure of a person is not in how they treat the powerful, but in how they treat those who have nothing to offer in return. I saw her live by this truth every day, and strangely, it was Satya who reminded me of it many years later. He shared a story that few in the audience had ever heard. Once, at a private event filled with leaders and business minds, Sundar noticed a quiet worker serving food at the edge of the hall. No one paid attention to him. Everyone was busy talking about profits, innovations, and strategies. But Sundar noticed Satya step away from the crowd, walk over to that worker, and thank him personally for his effort. "It was a small moment," Sundar said, "but it carried the weight of something much greater. It reminded me of my mother's words, that true respect begins in the unseen corners." The audience felt the weight of this truth. Many of them had been in rooms where ordinary people were overlooked, where attention only went to the ones with titles. Hearing this story struck a deep chord. It reminded them of their own forgotten moments, times when they could have shown respect, but did not. Sundar then revealed something even more surprising. After Satya wrote that letter to his mother, he also asked if he could meet her in person. When he met her, Sundar recalled, his voice thick with emotion, he did not speak to her as the CEO of Microsoft. He spoke to her as a son speaking to another mother. He told her that her lessons were not just for her family, but for the world. My mother smiled that day, and I saw a light in her eyes that I will never forget. The hall was silent once again, but this time, the silence carried both admiration and suspense. The story was no longer about Sundar's childhood alone. It was about how kindness had become a thread, weaving connections between people who might otherwise have stood apart. Sundar then paused, and his voice lowered, pulling the audience even closer. "But life is not simple," he said. "Kindness does not always receive kindness in return." My mother faced moments where her goodness was mocked, where her humility was mistaken for weakness. Those moments cut deep, and even I once doubted her words. But Satya's respect reminded me that kindness never truly disappears. It finds its way back, even if it takes years. The suspense deepened. The listeners felt a storm was coming, something hidden in the story that had not yet been revealed. Sundar's face carried both gratitude and pain, and people knew the next part of the story would not only honor kindness, but also test it. He ended with words that left everyone hanging on the edge of curiosity. "The greatest test of kindness is not when life is easy, but when the world seems determined to break it." And that test came for my mother and for me. The hall did not clap right away. People were too caught in the weight of those words. They knew the story was about to dive deeper, into conflict, into trials, into the moments when kindness is challenged most. The storm of doubt. The hall was still heavy with Sundar's last words. People could feel that something deeper was coming, something that would test the strength of kindness itself. Sundar's face softened, yet his voice carried a quiet weight. "My mother's kindness was not always easy," he began. "There were times when it was tested so hard that even I, as her son, wondered if it was worth it. There were moments when the world did not just ignore her kindness, but tried to break it." He told a story that few had ever heard. During his youth, when his father struggled with limited income and the family barely managed their needs, there was a man in their neighborhood who often mocked them. This man would call them weak for living simply, would laugh at Sundar's mother when she shared food or helped others while their own cupboards were almost empty. He said to her once, "You are a fool. Kindness does not feed your children. Kindness does not pay the bills." Sundar's voice trembled slightly as he spoke, as if the insult still echoed in his memory. He admitted that, as a boy, he felt anger burn inside him. He wanted his mother to fight back, to answer those words with sharpness. But she did not. She simply smiled and later told Sundar, "Let them think what they want. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is strength that does not need to shout. Yet Sundar confessed to the audience he doubted her. I asked her, how can kindness be strength when it makes us look powerless? How can it be strength when others laugh at us? And she only placed her hand on my head and said, Time will show you, Sundar. You will understand one day. The audience leaned closer. The conflict was raw and real. Sundar, the leader of a global company, admitted he once struggled with doubt and frustration. It made him human. It made him relatable. And then came the twist. Years later, when Sundar's career began to grow and he started working in the United States, he returned to his hometown for a visit. He met that same man again, the one who mocked his mother. The man was old now and his arrogance had faded. He was sick, weak, and alone. Sundar's first instinct was to turn away, but then he remembered his mother's words. Instead of walking past, he stopped, greeted the man, and helped him with medicine and food. The audience held their breath. Sundar's voice grew soft as he explained what happened next. When I gave him that help, he looked at me with tears. He said, Your mother was right. I see it now. Kindness is strength. I mocked her, but today I live because of the lesson she planted in you. The hall filled with gasps, some covering their mouths, some wiping their eyes. It was a moment that showed how kindness, though doubted and mocked, had the power to outlast pride and bitterness. Sundar paused, his eyes shining. That day, I finally understood my mother's words. Kindness is not about winning arguments. It is about winning the human heart. It does not always show its power in the moment, but in the end, it leaves a mark that nothing else can. He turned slightly toward Satya Nadella again, adding, And this is why I thanked you, Satya. Because when you honored her, you showed the world that her strength was not weakness. You helped remind me that her lessons belong not just to me, but to everyone who believes in respect and humanity. The hall erupted in applause this time, louder, stronger, filled with emotion. People stood up, some cheering, some crying quietly. They were not just listening to Sundar's story. They were living it with him. They felt the pain of being mocked, the doubt of feeling small, and the triumph of kindness proving itself in the end. But Sundar did not let the applause end the night. He raised his hand gently, and the room settled back into silence. With his voice low, he left them with another cliffhanger. Yet even after that moment, the test of kindness was not finished. There came a time when I was forced to choose between anger and kindness, not for my mother, not for my past, but for myself. And that choice changed everything. The suspense deepened again. The audience was hooked, knowing the story was about to reach an even greater test. The hardest choice. The hall was quiet, but inside every listener's heart there was a storm. Sundar's last words had planted a seed of suspense. What test could be harder than seeing his mother mocked, harder than forgiving the very man who once insulted her? People leaned forward, holding their breath, waiting for the next chapter of his story. Sundar's face was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of memory. My mother's lessons shaped me, he began. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And one day my test came in a way that shook me deeply. He explained that years into his career, when he was already leading major projects at Google, he faced a situation where his work was unfairly attacked by another leader in the industry. Rumors were spread, words were twisted, and his character was questioned. It was not just criticism, it was an attempt to break his spirit. For the first time in many years, Sundar said softly, I felt anger rise in me. I wanted to fight back, to prove them wrong, to answer insult with insult. But then I heard my mother's voice in my heart. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength that does not need to shout. The hall was silent. Everyone could imagine themselves in his place, facing lies and attacks, feeling the fire of anger inside. Sundar's struggle was not distant. It was their struggle too. He continued, I spent a night awake, asking myself if kindness could survive in a world that often rewards arrogance. I remembered how my mother once said, the world may push you to become like them, but strength is staying true to who you are. And so, I made my choice. I chose silence over insult. I chose patience over anger. I chose to let my work and my actions speak instead of my pride. The suspense deepened as Sundar revealed what happened next. Months later, he said, the truth came out. Those who attacked me were exposed for their dishonesty. But I did not feel joy in their downfall. Instead, I felt peace. Because I had not let anger change me. I had held on to the strength my mother gave me. The audience erupted into soft applause, not the loud kind that follows entertainment, but the deep kind that follows truth. People nodded, whispering to each other. They could see themselves in his choice. They could feel the weight of holding back anger when insulted. It was relatable. It was real. It was human. And then came the twist that bound everything back to Satya Nadella. Sundar revealed that during this storm, Satya had quietly reached out to him with words of support. Satya reminded me, Sundar said, turning toward him, that leadership is not about proving who is right in the moment. It is about carrying respect for yourself and for others, even when the world does not. Your words, Satya, gave me strength at a time when I could have lost it. Satya's eyes lowered with humility, and the hall felt the bond between the two leaders grow even stronger. What had once been seen as rivalry was now revealed to be respect built on the foundation of shared humanity. Sundar's voice softened as he prepared to close this part of the story. I learned that the greatest battles are not against others. They are against ourselves, against our anger, against our pride, against our fear. And when we choose kindness in those battles, we do not lose. We rise. The audience was silent again, their emotions heavy. They knew the story was reaching its peak. One more part remained. One final lesson. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the resolution, waiting to see how Lakhmi Pichai's lessons would be sealed forever in the hearts of those who listened. The legacy of kindness. The hall was heavy with silence, every heart waiting for Sundar's final words. People knew they had been taken on a journey deeper than they ever expected. They had heard of struggle, of respect, of tests that shook the soul. And now, as Sundar stood with steady breath, they knew the ending would be more than a conclusion. It would be a message for every life in the room. My mother lived a life without riches, Sundar began, his voice soft but carrying strength. She never owned much. She never asked for anything. But what she left behind is greater than any fortune. She left behind the lesson that kindness is the most powerful gift we can give. He paused, letting the words sink in. The audience leaned closer, almost afraid to miss a single word. I stand here tonight, not as a CEO, not as a leader of a company, but as a son. I thank you, Satya, for honoring my mother's kindness. You reminded the world that her life, though simple, carried a strength that even power cannot match. You showed me that kindness is not forgotten when shared. It multiplies. Satya Nadella, moved by Sundar's words, slowly stood up. The audience gasped softly. This was not planned. Satya turned to the crowd and spoke with humility. What Sundar says is true, he said. We may build companies, we may lead teams, we may change industries, but in the end, it is kindness that people remember. Lakhmi Pichai did not just raise a son. She raised a man who carries her light into the world. And that light inspires me too. The hall erupted into applause, strong, long, filled with emotion. Some stood, some clapped with tears in their eyes, some bowed their heads in respect. What they were witnessing was no longer a moment between two leaders. It was a celebration of something greater, the power of humility, resilience, and kindness that outlasts time. Sundar's voice trembled slightly as he spoke his closing words. My mother is no longer here, but I believe she is listening. And if she were standing beside me tonight, she would not tell you about her struggles. She would only tell you to be kind. Because kindness, even when small, even when unnoticed, has the power to change lives in ways we cannot measure. He paused, his eyes glistening. So I ask all of you tonight, not to remember me, not to remember Satya, but to remember the lesson of lakhmi pichai. Choose kindness, even when it is hard. Choose respect, even when rivalry seems easier. Choose humility, even when pride calls louder. Because in the end, it is these choices that shape not just our lives, but the world we leave behind. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The sound was thunderous, but it was not just applause. It was gratitude. Gratitude for being reminded of something so pure, something so human, something that touched the deepest part of every heart. Sundar stepped back, and for a brief moment he closed his eyes. He could almost feel his mother's presence, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her smile reminding him that her lessons had found their way into the world. And as the applause echoed, Sundar knew that her legacy of kindness would live on, not only through him, not only through Satya, but through every person who carried this message forward. The story was complete. The legacy of Lakhmi Pichai's kindness had traveled from a small home in India to the hearts of people across the world, proving once again that true strength is not measured by what we gain, but by how we give.